But now let's go to the world of cryptids. Yes, cryptids. Because we've talked a lot about cryptids this week, and we talked about Zermatism earlier, and he was saying Stanislav was saying that all over the world there are stories of Bigfoot-esque creatures. And he named off a couple of them. The Woodwoes in Britain and a bunch of other ones. Now, one of the ones he named off was the Almas of Mongolia, a Bigfoot-esque creature. I started looking around at a couple of them, and there is a story from the 1870s of an Alma that was actually captured. So let's go back in time to the 1870s. Let's get in the Carpenter copter. Actually, no, that'll probably bring too much attention. Let's go ahead and hop in the Jason Jalopy. That'll be a little more bit of subterfuge, because we don't want to get captured by these people either. We go into the Jason Jalopy. We go back in time. We're in the 1870s. We're in Russia. Far East Russia. Mongolian area. So I should have told you to grab your jacket because it's going to get really cold out here. But it's too late, so you're probably going to get frostbite. These are the remote forests of Abkhazia. Abkhazia. No, it's not a realm from Lord of the Rings. It's actually a real place, Abkhazia. There's a village there. Just a normal little Russian village back in time. Doing villager stuff. Thatched huts. Fire with a little pot over it. A metal pot. And then, they're making stew and little kids are running around with little sticks. Hitting each other, whatever. And so, these two hunters. I don't know how many hunters. But anyways, these hunters come out of the woods and they're like, we caught one. And everyone's like, what's going on? And hunters start leading a huge, hairy woman into the camp at musket point or arrow point, whatever they had. Ranged weapon pointed at her. And that's actually going to be a really bad taste when I reveal this, but she comes walking in. They have her captured. She's taller than anyone else there. She's very, very strong, they say, but they don't say how they know that. I don't know if she was like snapping necks in the woods or knocking over trees. But anyways, these Russian hunters captured an Alma, a large Bigfoot-esque beast of the Mongolian region. Now, this is how they're normally listed. There can be between 5, which isn't super tall, but between 5 to 6.5 feet. They actually have a lot of Neanderthal-like features. Pronounced brow, flat nose, weak chin. This one was covered in hair. Sometimes they're hairy, sometimes they're super hairy, sometimes they're just normal hairy, sometimes they're just like Italian hairy. But anyways, this one comes in, and they got it at ranged weapon point. And they're like, well, what do we do with this thing? I mean, this thing is monstrous. It's one of the Almas. We can't really let it go because then it might just start bashing us in. But we can't really keep a prisoner here because it's so strong. But the village elders go, we can't let it go. At least in this town, we know where it's at all times. Now, there was something about it that they thought, maybe we can communicate with it. So they tried speaking to it in whatever language. I don't think they were speaking Russian that far out in the area, but probably they were speaking something. And they tried speaking something to this creature, and it wouldn't say anything. It was mute. It would just make noises. So they're like, okay, well, we can't tell it not to kill us if it sees us out in the woods. So our safest bet is to keep it isolated in this village. We'll just keep it prisoner. Now, what's bizarre is this is the story we have. We have them capturing the Alma. They name it Zana. And then we have 40 years later. She was prisoner for 40 years. And in that time period, one of the tribe members, I believe one of the elders, but one of the tribe members fell in love with Zana, this massive, hairy beast. That they considered it a beast. And he fell in love with it. And he wooed it. And had sex with it. So he's banging this mythical creature that they have always been leery of in this area. And they have 4 kids. 4 kids. 2 of the sons lived long enough to have children of their own, and I believe 2 of them died fairly early. And after 40 years of captivity, now married to this dude, now raising kids, still never said a word. The children could talk. Children could totally talk fine, but Zana never said anything. But after 40 years, eventually, love conquers all but death, and Zana passes away. This story has been very popular in Russian, Mongolian circles, to the point that scientists said, you know what, we really need to figure out what Zana was. Let's get DNA from her descendants. And then it'll show. Was she a humanoid? Was she something else? So, a couple years ago, they did it. They got DNA from her grandson, and I think they actually might have had her tooth. I'm a little iffy on that. They got DNA from some of her grandchildren, and they look at it, and they're like, okay. Let me run these numbers again, because this is not a good story if this is true. And they're looking at the numbers, and they're like, kind of holding the report upside down, and they're like, this is not what we thought. Now, every so often, we'll find Bigfoot hair, and they run it to a laboratory, and it's a dog. Or they'll find a Bigfoot print, and they'll start analyzing it, and it turns out this is obviously a fake. This is the worst example ever, of you running a test on a Bigfoot-type creature, and it coming back as something else. Because basically, the story people have been telling for close to 100 years about how this Russian town had captured a Alma, turns out that when they did the test on the grandson, and they ran all the numbers, that the creature who was described as a large, hairy creature who couldn't talk and roamed around and was prisoner for 40 years was a black woman. That's what they caught. They caught a black woman in the woods, and they kept her prisoner for 40 years, and they had a bunch of babies. And she never said a word. They wouldn't let her do nothing except, run around. And there's people who are racist are like, yeah, I'm racist. I'm totally cool with it. Being accidentally racist is the worst. At least the person who's just like, oh no, I'm totally racist. I don't like those races. Okay. But when you're accidentally racist, it's kind of worse because you don't think you're being racist. Trapping a black person for 40 years because you think they're a monster is the worst example of being accidentally racist I've ever seen. So, apparently, what happened was they ran the test and they said she would have been 100% sub-Saharan African. And there were they had just freed a bunch of slavery ended in Russia, I believe 2 years prior to this. So there was a bunch of free slaves running around in Russia in general. But in that particular area, they figured that she must have just gotten lost from, who she was with, or was just wandering around. She ran into these hunters who were probably smaller, who probably were physically smaller than her. I don't know where the hair thing comes from, why they kept describing her as super hairy, but they saw this tall black woman, and they're like, oh, you must be a monster. And they captured her. And they held her prisoner for 40 years. And then for decades and 100 years, people were telling the story about this town that caught this Bigfoot. Now, that story in and of itself, accidental racism aside, the story of the Almas is even more fascinating than that. There's a reason why they said this must be an Alma. I'm going to keep going back to Bigfoot literature here. In Bigfoot literature, the Native Americans saw it as this spirit creature, and when the Westerners came here, they've seen it as this one-off, maybe in a group of 3 or 4 type of creatures that are spotted, but there's no proof ever found. There's maybe one video clip, some blurry photos, stuff like that. The Almas are amazingly documented, not in modern times, which is what makes it interesting. Like I said, it was the description of a Neanderthal. Pronounced brow, flat nose, weak chin. How would somebody in the Middle Ages know what a Neanderthal looked like? We know what they look like now because we have recreations and drawings of them. But they shouldn't have had those back then. They didn't have forensic anthropology. They shouldn't have been able to say this creature looks just like this type of human that it used to exist, unless they were seeing them then. There's this book. It is a Tibetan medicinal book. There is a drawing of an Alma and a description of the Alma. Everything else in that book is a plant or an animal that lives today and can be verified. That book has no mythological creatures in it at all. No dragons, no Groot slangs, nothing. Deer and tigers and berries and bananas and whatever. Everything in that book is scientifically verifiable. You can see it today, except for the Alma. So that makes people think, why would you write this huge... It would basically be if you picked up Grey's Anatomy and you flipped through it, and on page 84 was an elf. And then you went to the next page and it was a thorax. That's how this book was set up. It was 100%. Everything we can... 99% we can verify exists, except for this creature. And it wasn't... The Almas weren't a solitary, small group type of thing. In 1420, there was a guy named Hans Schlittberger. He was taken prisoners by the Mongols. He's being brought back to the Khan. Here was his quote. He survived long enough to write a book and talk about his journeys. But imagine you're in a caravan, coming through the steppes of Mongolia. So your carriage is all bumpy because they can't drive it right. It's like one wheel's on one step, one wheel's on the other. You're coming through this, and you're this Westerner, and you look out the window, and this is what you see. On the same mountain, there are savages who are not like other people, and they live there. They are covered all over the body with hair, except the hands and face, and run about like other wild beasts in the mountain, and also eat leaves and grass and anything they can find. The lord of the country sent to Edigi a man and a woman from among these savages that had been taken in the mountain. So we have another instance of these creatures being captured, but he's looking at them. He's seeing basically a herd, a tribe, a village, whatever word you want to use for these beasts. These Neanderthal-like beasts being sighted in the year 1420, when Hans was a captive. So, did these creatures exist? I think, if anything, these probably... I mean, we don't have photos of them now, but it's in a super remote area. It's one thing to be walking through Oregon and see a Bigfoot. It's another thing to have to endure the harshness of the Mongolian landscape just to get a photograph, and they probably just beat you to death. Actually, it's funny, they keep getting captured, so they're probably really sucky at combat, and they eat leaves and grass, so I don't know how strong they really could be. But they also eat like other animals as well. My main diet wouldn't be leaves and grass if I was a cryptid. It's kind of a... You want to have sharp teeth to eat people. But anyway, so these creatures are probably the best bet we have for proving that there's some sort of Bigfoot-esque creature. And one last story to wrap up the Alma mystery. I think probably they did exist at some point. I think the description's too accurate to things we do know existed, i.e. Neanderthals. I do think they existed at some point in very, very modern history, and at this point they could have been completely wiped out or gone underground or something like that. But one last interesting tidbit to this. In 1941, when Germany invaded Russia, the Red Army captured a spy, a big, hairy spy, who wouldn't talk, who wouldn't say anything, and the Russians blew his brains out. Because what else are you going to do? You're getting invaded, you see someone that you don't... He's not a local, he's not Russian, he's a big hairy dude, he's not talking to you, so they shoot him. And there's always been the idea that also could have been an Alma, because he was a wild man, couldn't speak, covered in hair. I know the Germans were pretty savvy on their, spying, but I don't think they're like, hey, Gruber, over there, make sure you don't shave for a while and run around in the woods and maybe you can pick up some intel. They probably caught an Alma. Here's the weird thing, really. The world is so vast that you can have entire tracts of land that are not explored or haven't been visited by humans in a long, long time. There are forests and jungles and plains and caves that we know of or might not, but we don't go to them. To those cryptids, to the Almas who are in hiding, still having their civilization somewhere. We are the cryptids. Every so often, they may catch a glimpse of a human or look up and see a plane, and that's their cryptid. That's their legend. Those are their creatures that keep them up at night. Us. This kind of plays into the whole missing 411 thing. Like, when humans go into the woods, we are now on their turf. When we go into these vast plains, we're now on their turf. When we move out of civilization, we are on the turf of the cryptids. And it makes you wonder how many humans have been kidnapped and held prisoner for 40 years in these dark, hidden, remote villages. We'd never hear their stories. They would just vanish. And in that village, they would tell their children the time that they caught the small person with weak limbs to prove the story's true, that we really existed. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.